So everyone, hi, I'm Mike. I'm from Portland, but I'm not from that Portland. I'm from the other one. My last job was at a company based in Portland, Oregon, so you can probably imagine that was a source of a lot of stupid, which Portland's better jokes. I say stupid because obviously Portland, Maine's better. Start off with a little confession. I haven't been doing Ruby all that long, so I'm not a rock star. I don't have any gems that you're using in your project right now that you've ever heard of. I've never had a high-profile argument with DHH. I don't have a blog to read. So I don't know if, what am I doing here even? So I got into Ruby like a lot of people through Rails. I was a Java developer, C++ before that, C before that, assembly language before that. But my first transition into Ruby was through Rails, and for the longest time, that was really all I knew, was how to be a Rails developer. And I finally had an opportunity recently to go outside that little bubble and see more of the Ruby community. And I thought, I learned a few interesting things along the way, and I think there are probably some other people that are in a similar boat that have really just done Rails up until this point. So it's kind of cool to see what's out there. So these are some of the apps I worked on. I say big in quotation marks because they're not anything that gets a lot of traffic or huge things you've heard of, but they're decent sized code-wise. Like City Eats, I was the leader of that project, and that at some point had 12 developers working on it. So big kind of massive chunk of Rails code. Right now, working for OpenBay and other things, a lot of these others like REM is out of business, and like most Rails apps, they all suffered from your typical Rails problems. With fat models where you're conflating your persistence logic and your business logic, massive controllers that are doing way more than they're supposed to be doing. Views that have all this logic in them, render this partial if that, render that partial if that, and stuff happens. You get in a hurry, we know we should be doing presenters to get the views clean. We know we should be using service objects instead of dumping it up in the model, but we have deadlines. Maybe the junior developer who submitted a pull request is a little sensitive, and you didn't dare tell them to redo it. And we get into this situation. But good news, this isn't a big complaint fest about Rails. Rails is awesome, and as someone who did a lot of Java and built a lot of factories and strategies and configured a lot of XML with their dependency injection frameworks, I'm not going to complain about Rails and how simple it is. It's been great. Right now I work for OpenBay, as you said earlier. It's a startup based in Boston, and we're kind of cool. We're trying to disrupt the industry for vehicle repair, and it's been a lot of fun. But when I submitted the talk, and when I was originally working on it, I actually worked there. So what I'm going to talk about today was about my previous job, and I left amicably. I wasn't fired, so there's still a great bunch of people. But I was the CTO there. It's one of these boutique Rails and mobile development shops. So there's a lot of them around. Dockyard's one of them. Kind of a shop that you hire out to do custom development for people. And one of the most difficult things about running a company like this is you always need to have developers on the bench ready to go for when you hire that next big client. So you want to have your team of 4 or 5 people all set to jump on this big money maker, but at the same time you don't want to have a whole lot of people sitting on your bench because they're not making you any money. So it's kind of a constant balance between having too many people and not enough people. There's a bunch of ways you can try to mitigate that. You can have them contribute to open source. Obviously it's good karma. We're all taking all this open source and using it. It's good to give back, and it's good to get your name out there working on it. Another thing you do is speak at conferences or write blog posts or do other community outreach things. And the last thing you can do is work on your own products. So one little secret about these boutique agencies that are doing all your custom software is, I won't speak for all of them, but most of them would much rather be working on their own product than working on yours. Just about all of them have dreams of building their own cool stuff and aren't quite as interested in your insurance tracking software or your social network for monks or whatever it is. So that's what we decided to do. We were in a situation where we had a bunch of developers coming off of a project. We had prospects in the pipeline, But we weren't quite there yet, so we decided that we would have an incubation month. All of us had these ideas for products we wanted to build, and we had a couple of different teams that we decided we would get. I think there were actually 3 teams with 3 different products, and we were going to try to go and build something and see if we could actually take something all the way to market. And as you can imagine, for developers, we were kind of like kids in a candy store. Suddenly we weren't stuck building what the clients wanted, and we could use whatever tools and languages and stuff we wanted to use. We didn't have to use stuff that was safe. And it was an opportunity to go learn. A lot of people were doing different things in Rails now. There's a lot of people out there that are building these single-page whiz-bang apps with a very thin back end, and that's what we decided to do. We were going to build one of these JavaScript thingies that everyone was building, and we weren't going to use Rails to do it because we already knew Rails and we wanted to learn something new. So then we had to decide what we were going to build that back end in. And there was kind of a cult of people, I'll call them a cult, that really, really loved Clojure. I wasn't one of them. Insert your stupid joke about parentheses here. But I didn't really want to jump on that bandwagon, mostly because we only had a month, and I didn't want to change my mind to how functional programming worked. It's supposed to be this, big life-changing event to learn how to do that. So we decided to forego that. I was in the clique that really wanted to do Go. I'm, being an old C and C++ systems guy, when I look at Go, it kind of tugs at my heartstrings a little bit. It reminds me of the old days when I was, writing C algorithms for disk drives, but no one else was really as enamored with it as I was. So in the end, we said, all right, we'll stick with Ruby. We all know Ruby. We won't get quite that weird and change languages. So we decided we had this criteria for what the backend was going to be. It had to be done in Ruby. We were building a RESTful API, so it had to be well suited to that. It had to be something that we could deploy easily on a Heroku or an Engine Yard or one of these platforms as a service, because we didn't have time to go and build out all kinds of infrastructure. We wanted something lightweight because it had to be actively under development, so not something that hadn't seen a pull request approved in weeks or months. And it couldn't be Rails only because we wanted to learn something new. And we all knew Rails, and we'd all been doing Rails for a while. So that led basically narrowed it down to these 4. Goliath was a little too weird and probably a little too hard to deploy, so we skipped over that one. Grape is a project by Intridia. That's kind of a thin veneer around Rack that's actually designed just for doing APIs. And it's actually, I'm using it now at OpenBay, and it's a pretty cool library for building RESTful apps, a piece of middleware. So, but we didn't end up choosing it. We kind of narrowed it down to Padrino and Sinatra. Padrino, which probably would have been the more natural choice, but at the time it was kind of not being very actively developed. This was back in April. And we were big users of JRuby at Burnside Digital, and there had been some pull requests that they'd been sitting on for a long time to make it work with JRuby, and we decided, well, maybe they aren't really actively working on it anymore. We'll skip it. Since then, it's kind of seen a renaissance. So, making that same decision today, maybe we would consider it. But we ended up going with Sinatra, which is kind of the default for, I'm going to build an API. Let's build it out of Sinatra. For the front end, it was similar. We wanted something that was actively developed, a strategic choice for the company, something that was well documented, and had a stable API. And those last 2 are kind of important. But I'm not going to talk a lot about JavaScript, because this isn't a JavaScript conference. But these are kind of the 4 that were floating around as options. Your typical Angular versus Ember. CanJS is a kind of a more obscure one that one of the members of our team knew of the main guy running CanJS, so he was kind of pushing for it, but we thought it was a little too weird. Backbone we'd already used, so we decided we wanted to learn something new. In the end, Angular went out. And then remember, again, this is back in April. Ember was still a bit of a moving target. The documentation, a lot of people were still complaining about then, because it was a little bit weak. If we had to go back today and make the same decision, we might go with Ember instead, because a lot of that has changed since then. But at the time, Angular made sense, and that's what we went with. So being developers and having only a month, we over-engineered the crap out of this thing. For a small team, I don't really know what we were thinking. So what we were building, everyone here used Exceptional or Airbrake. We hated it. We thought it was, you could do a whole lot better. Apparently a lot of other people felt the same way, because there are a bunch of other companies that we were blissfully ignorant of that had also gone and rebuilt. Airbrake and Exceptional, they built like Honey Badger, Roll Bar, Sentry. There's a bunch of other companies doing this. We decided we could do it too. So we're going to build a gem that sat in a Rails app, talk to a collector that's collecting all of our exception data, dumping it in a queue. We're going to have these worker processes pulling stuff off the queue, normalizing it, amalgamating it, do whatever, dumping it in the database. Have our API server over here and our single page app, and that would be how it would all fit together. Today I just want to focus on the Ruby-ish parts. So we started off, we had our collector and our server, and that's Sinatra. That's it. That's a whole running Sinatra app, and there wasn't much there to look at, and geez, that's all we've got. How are we going to scale this to be this big project with all these different things going on? Well, not knowing really what to do next, we did what any highly paid developer worth his or her salt would do, and we went straight to Stack Overflow. This isn't going to be a how-to on Sinatra, because there are a lot of those kind of presentations out there, and more than I could ever fit into just this presentation, but this is what we settled on. So we basically had routes is where all the controllers are going to be. We had a bunch of service objects in our services folder. Specs and templates. The templates were, because this was just a backend, these were actually only for email. Those aren't for any kinds of views that you might be thinking templates are. And then a config folder. And then in all of these we had init RBs, and this is actually kind of a common way to do Sinatra apparently. Instead of having magic that goes out to a directory and finds all the files and includes it all and makes sure it's the right name, like Rails does it, you just have an init with a bunch of requires in it. It just requires everything in that directory. It's really straightforward and basic, and it served us pretty well. We did have one initializers directory where we did do some magic, like going through and iterating on the files and running stuff, but for the most part, it was just simple require statements, and it served us pretty well. Just kind of an aside, after we went through all this, we kind of discovered a project called Monk, which aims to simplify all of this. The website seems to be dead, so I don't know if that's gone or what, but maybe it'll be back, I don't know. So one thing you might have noticed, there were no models in that layout of our Sinatra app, and that brings us to ORM. We actually tried 3 different ORMs over the course of this little 1-month project. We started off with Data Mapper. Data Mapper was really cool, and it reminded me a lot of my Java days, because you have to actually tell it what all your columns are and do a lot of the extra work that you have to do with like a hibernated JPA. But we ran into a few problems with it, and we went and looked through the pull requests and the bugs, and it turns out they're kind of all working on Data Mapper 2.0 right now, and we were still on 1.0 because 2.0 wasn't done yet, and they weren't paying a whole lot of attention to it. We started looking through the code to see where the problems were, and where we only had a month, we decided we were going to try something else, and that's a good segue to open source. And this is something that you kind of take for granted, and I know that I always say it's great, the source is right there. You can go and fix it and actually look at it. That's something I'd never done in Ruby, and that's probably the biggest thing I learned during my little sojourn. I've always been intimidated by the complexity of Rails source code. If there's a bug, I don't even know whether to look in active record or active model or arrow or how it's all set up. I'm intimidated by the talent of the community. There are people out there that are way better than me at this stuff. They know what they're doing in this complex code. I'll just leave it over there, and I'd never run into any problems with it. One of the things I learned when working on some of these smaller projects that weren't Rails was that you don't need to be intimidated anymore. In fact, I've never used bundle open. I don't know if people here knew about this all along, but for me, I was pairing with one of my co-developers. He said, just do bundle open, and I was like, whoa. So you end up in the gem that you actually wanted to look at, and I started going through and debugging this stuff and putting print statements in and working on Data Mapper and other ORMs, and it was great. It was liberating because I learned how other people did stuff. I got to actually see these other libraries in action, and it wasn't a big black box anymore. And I would advise anyone to do that, even with Rails, because now that I've gotten over my fear, it's been an eye-opener. Look at your source code that you're using. The next thing we tried was SQL, and we ran into more problems, and I did a lot more debugging there, which is sad because I loved SQL. It's kind of an active record with more. It's kept this notion of data sets where it separates the data sets a little bit from the models themselves, and I really liked it. The problem we ran into was we were doing queries. Once we got it up onto engine yard locally, it ran fine, but we were getting results back from other queries than what we asked. It was like some query from a while back, and we tried like hell to figure it out and couldn't, and it was probably something we're doing wrong because the guy that wrote SQL was really smart, but we couldn't nail it down, and we were running out of time, so we swallowed our pride. We were still not using Rails, but we were using Active Record. But all of this we put into its own gem, and that's something that was really critical for us because it saved our bacon. We had all of our models separate so that all of the Sinatra code and all of the processor, the worker code, wasn't affected at all when we switched these ORMs out. Someone could go off and change all the models so they now looked like what that ORM wanted, and they were blissfully ignorant of all these changes that were happening in the model section. So if you can pass hashes in and get hashes back, you're great. And the reason we did it wasn't because we were planning on experimenting and changing our ORMs. We were thinking that at some point way down the road, for this exception data, it might make sense to go with a NoSQL store, and we wanted to have the freedom to switch that out and not worry about it. But it ended up saving us because of the ORM switching more than anything else. So that was the next lesson. And this is something that in the Java community we do all the time. We tended to wrap our library choices in other abstraction layers so that we could switch things out if the time came. I think it's because so many people got burned by getting attached to struts and EJBs and all these other things, and then not being able to reuse their business logic. So they were abstracting things away, and that's something we don't do that maybe we could stand to do a little bit more of. The next thing I learned about was rack. So to me, rack was this sort of thing people talked about, and Rails runs on rack. I never really knew what that meant. And it's really pretty basic. It's a rack application is just an object that responds to a method called call. That's a rack app. Ta-da! So you've got this hello world. It's returning an array of HTTP status, a type, and content, and that's it. So you pile a bunch of these things together, and they're all called middleware. And one of the first things we ran into with Sinatra, or something that I woke up in the middle of the night panicking about, was I don't know shit about security, and I probably should worry about that, and the Rails guys have all done that for us. And it turned out there's a bunch of middleware already out there that you can plug in, and it can take care of a lot of the stuff for you. There's a rack attack middleware, rack protection, and then OmniAuth, good old OmniAuth that a lot of us use in our Rails apps is also can slide into the middleware layer. So that was the first chunk of middleware that we had to add Sinatra to make it good like Rails. Serialization was another thing that we had to do. I was surprised that, I kind of assumed, not knowing that Rails was just this thing running on rack, that deserializing JSON into our hash maps was something that you had to insert something into the middleware to get done. I'm looking back, I can't believe I didn't know that, but hey, there's middleware that you can just plug in, and that'll make it almost like Rails that way. By the way, hash with indifferent access, that you don't get for free with this. This is something else that Rails gives you in active support. So you know how when you're looking at params, and you can either use quotes or you can use symbols, that's not free. You have to also bring that along. Let's see, session cookies. Well, there's another piece of middleware that we had to bring in to make it do the same stuff Rails did. We even wrote our own middleware. It turns out when you're building an API, there's a lot of errors that come from exceptions that you end up having to implement the error responses over and over and over again, right? So object not found, 404, 401 for unauthorized, 422 for what? So we created our own middleware so we wouldn't have to keep writing that over and over again. This is it. This pattern, you'll see it when other people write middleware, they'll usually dupe themselves and then call another copy of it. I wish I could tell you exactly why everyone does this. It has something to do with other middlewares upstream of yours not closing the body before they hand it off to you. It can cause some sort of deadlock. But everyone does it, so we did it too. And all it's doing is it's calling the next level of middleware, and then it's rescuing from it. And if we get an exception, it dumps it to a log, and then it creates this exception handler, which is another thing that we created. And it sends it out, grabs the body and the status out of our handler and sends that upstream. So when in our initializer for our app, we just go through and register a bunch of these. We say, hey, if you get a unique constraint violation, send out an already taken and a 422. If you get a record not found, send out a 404. And then we didn't have to sprinkle that all through our code. This is what the exception handler looks like. I don't know if I have a whole lot of time to go through it. This is that register method. Just adding it to a big hash at the top. And when you instantiate one of these things, you pass it the exception. The handler, it was calling handler to get the body and status. So it's just telling you what it's doing. And this is where it returns, it returns the status and body by grabbing this. That's a lot of code for here. But anyway, the short of it is middleware is easy to write. And you need a lot of it to make Sinatra do everything that Rails does. There are a bunch of tools that we learned about along the way that helped us get our jobs done. We had this giant, freaking thing. All of these, that's a source repo, that's a source repo, that's a source repo, that's a source repo, that's a source repo. We had one for our victim app that would cause exceptions so we could test this thing. It was eventually spread over 8 repositories. Just to get the darn thing running locally, you had to have 4 repos with all your little apps running, which turned out to be kind of a pain. So we got Vagrant set up. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's probably everyone uses Vagrant now, but at the time it was kind of a cool thing that lets you automate setting up VMs. So we could just set up VMs with all these guys, VM with all of these guys pre-configured and run it. It still didn't help with the nuisance of having to commit to 4 different places. If I was working on one feature, we do the pull request model at Burnside where you submit a pull request, someone else reviews your code and accepts it into the real repo. We all run off forks. And when you're doing this many different repositories, it gets to be kind of hard when you're adding one feature. And if we had to do it all over again, we might collapse it into one just to get that out of the way. If I had to do it all over again, I'd probably collapse it into one. Other handy tools. I love the Rails console. It's great that you can drop down and get a command line interface and test stuff out, particularly with your models, checking all the queries, and I missed that. And then I realized, well, it's not really magic. Anyone can just write a setup script that can do almost the exact same thing, and this is it. That's the whole whopping script. So all we had to do was require bundler, require active record. We used UUIDs, so we had to get some stuff set up for that. Bundler require, connect to the database, run these patches, and now all I have to do is Ruby and the name of the setup script, and I've got basically the same thing that you can do in Rails, but it's for Sinatra. Another cool tool, Rerun. Does anyone here remember Rerun? Okay. Rerun just monitors your app directory for file changes, and if it sees anything, it restarts your server for you. In Rails, that would never work because it takes like an hour and a half to start a server. But with Sinatra, it would only take a few seconds. This worked great. Another thing I really hadn't considered was cores. So doing your standard Rails apps, I've had to do some JavaScript, Ajax-y kind of things, and Cores was always kind of like, yeah, you could do that, but why don't you just use JSON-P? It's better supported. Or why don't you just do something else? When you're building one of these apps, you really probably ought to buckle down and learn about it. So just to review what it is, say you have the user's browser and the web server. Before you make an API call, they do this thing called pre-flight, where you send, instead of a get or a put or whatever, you send in options to the resource that you want to hit. And you give it an HTTP header with origin in it. And you're saying, hey, this is myapp.com. I'm asking for that resource. And he says, hey, that's okay. By the way, I allow anyone from here to call my API. And that's in his response, his HTTP headers. And we say, okay, we want this resource, and this is who I am. And it works great for all of these browsers. IE 10, it does work. We were in a lucky position where we were developing a tool for developers. So we could say, screw IE 8 and 9, who cares how well it's supported there. With Angular, there have been some people who have used some techniques, and by techniques I mean rewritten the HTTP client. So it'll work with 8 and 9, because 8 and 9 use this separate JavaScript object. They don't use the regular XHR object to do cores. And they've written it so it'll use one or the other. But like I said, it wasn't a problem for us. Hopefully someday we can all do it this way instead of using hacks like JSON-P or iframes or whatever you're using to get around cross-domain stuff. I didn't know, this was really stupid of me, right? I thought, oh, single page app. So I can just go to like File and open my index.html and it'll work, right? And it doesn't turn out it works that way. Cores doesn't work at all with the file protocol. It's only HTTP. So if you try to read a static page and it tries to do a call over to your API, even if that'll accept API calls from anywhere, it doesn't include file, your kind of host. So you do need to run a little server. We were using Grunt to run our Angular app to serve the one static page. But doing the HTTP cores stuff, middleware. So you can get rack cores to be able to stuff that into your app. So in summary, wow, I got through this in time. I'm hurrying. Don't be afraid to look at the source code of the libraries you're using. Isolate your app from your libraries because you'll thank yourself later if there's any chance. Don't go nuts and do isolate everything, but if there are some libraries that you think might shift, it's a good idea to wrap something around it. Middleware is really easy and cool. There are lots of tools out there that go beyond the Rails community, so learn about them and figure out if you're going to build an app like this, how you're going to deal with cores. So spending time away from Rails, it demystified it for me, and it made me more comfortable with the language, and it was totally worth it. However, if I were doing it all again, I'd probably just use Rails API. I'm really thankful I did this. Like I said, I learned a lot from it. But now that I know that, and I know not to take for granted all that Rails does for us, especially with all the layers of middleware it comes with, now I don't think that it is so fat and ugly, and that you can use something like Rails API and have no more than you really need. And with that, the one plug, everyone here is probably hiring. That includes us. If you're an experienced Rails developer and you want to work at a local startup and get in on the ground floor and disrupt an industry, see me afterwards, or you can ping me on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle. I'm on GitHub, or you can email me. I can get you in touch with the right people. And that's it.